When you engage in a study of enforcement from the standpoint of how can we do it better, because isn't that the question? Can't we do things better to improve our community? When you talk about enforcement, it's not just about police officers doing the great work that they do, responding to calls, solving the burglary of your residence, solving the car that was stolen, the assault on the street, the shooting on the street. That is important work from a law enforcement perspective. But law enforcement has come to the table across the nation and said and asked the question, can we do this in a smarter fashion? And this is what results from a UnifiedErie perspective, is a study of ways that other people have engaged in enforcement smarter.
The individuals in the community that are charged with enforcing the law have a plan. We're not just out there simply making arrests and putting people in jail and saying, there, isn't everything good? We actually have a strategy that has worked elsewhere in the country. And that's what the enforcement prong of UnifiedErie is all about. The main thing about that strategy is doing things differently. We can't keep doing it the way we always have, because that's exactly how we got where we are now. So we have to do what we're doing better. First of all, we have to communicate better. When I say we, I'm talking about law enforcement. The agencies of Erie County and the United States, who all are in Erie County, we have to collaborate. Well, you have the District Attorney's Office, the U.S. Attorney's Office, Erie Police Department, State Police, ATF, FBI, the Sheriff's Office, Juvenile Probation, Adult Probation, the U.S. Marshal Service, Border Patrol. Those agencies often work in their own silos. And a lot of that's for good reason, because there's very secure information that can't be exposed or spread out over a number of agencies. But in dealing with the problems that we have in Erie County now, the day-to-day violence, the day-to-day youth problems and crime, dealing with that absolutely requires that collaboration. All of us are communicating on a daily, weekly, monthly basis with information. We have the ability, because technology now lets us do just about anything. Technology allows us to do so much more in terms of our communication. We're sharing our technology. We're sharing our ability to do our jobs and do them well.
As few as 2% of this community engages in almost 80% of the criminal activity. So here's a thought. Instead of focusing your law enforcement efforts on 100% of the community, what if you focused your efforts on the 2% that's engaged in the largest percentage of crime?
A small percentage of the people commit a disproportionately large portion of the crimes. There's not hundreds and thousands of them. There's core groups of them who are responsible for that crime, for that violent crime that we're trying to curb, we're trying to eradicate. So how are we going to do that exactly? Well, once we know who they are, there's a lot of options for us. Remember the collaboration? Remember the communication? Well, what we've been doing from a law enforcement perspective is we've established a gun crime working group. Remember, this is all very much about guns and the violence that comes from individuals who have them and are not afraid to use them. So we have a gun crime working group, and what does that do? That allows us to share the data with all the agencies. Who's likely to have a gun when you pull that car over and you identify them as being in the car? Police officers, state troopers now have at their disposal that information that tells them, I got 3 guys in the back seat there. All 3 of them are identified as offenders who've had guns when they've been picked up in the past. Tells them about perhaps how cautious they need to be when approaching that vehicle. Another very important part of how UnifiedErie is working, the enforcement aspect and how we're policing smarter, how we're working better, is a fugitive task force. There are individuals all around Erie County who have warrants out for their arrest. It might be for a crime, it might be for something much less like child support, traffic tickets, non-appearance for a court at the magisterial district judge level, a low-level court. But the bench warrants are out there. And what was happening in the past was these individuals had bench warrants, and so the probation office might have a warrant out for their arrest, and the sheriff might know about it, but the U.S. Marshals maybe did not know about it, or the Erie Police Department did not know, or vice versa. That open line of communication now, through establishing a fugitive task force, which the Erie County District Attorney's Office has lent a detective to, the state police have lent a trooper to, thereby doubling the U.S. Marshals Service Fugitive Task Force. Hundreds and hundreds of individuals in 2 years have been picked up with the Fugitive Task Force work. That is smart policing. That's exactly what we're supposed to be doing. Sharing the information, allowing us to take these individuals off the street. The foot and saturation patrols. You know, a lot of what we hear, certainly what I hear when I'm in the community is, you know, it's not like the old days. You used to know the cop on the beat. You used to know who was out there, and you could talk to the officer, and the officer would know you, and how important that was for that community and police relationship, which we know has fallen on hard times in the country today. So the foot patrols, the individuals that are out there walking these neighborhoods where the crime is, the bicycle patrols, very important to those individuals in those neighborhoods. To what? Remember how we started off, to feel safer in their community. When they see that officer walking down the street, hi, how are you? Anything I can do for you? Big difference in terms of what we're trying to do from an enforcement perspective. Because the better the relationship gets, the safer the neighborhoods are.
You see things like foot and bike patrols, a mobile precinct. You see law enforcement officers regularly engaged with people in that neighborhood in a very healthy and direct fashion.
Mobile precinct, same concept of having that vehicle in a particular area of the city or the county to let those individuals in that area know that law enforcement has their back right here, right now, tonight, tomorrow, next week. We'll be back. And so you can imagine then the individuals who want to do bad things in those neighborhoods, well, with a foot patrol, saturation patrols, bike patrols, in other words, a presence of law enforcement in that area, those individuals are not going to be doing their work in that area that night or that week or that month. And the part about the information sharing is there's a reason that law enforcement would be there. We would be in that neighborhood, on that street, in that area, because our information tells us that this is a hot spot right now. And it's a hot spot because the chronic violent offenders and the people that they surround themselves with are there or have been, and we need to break that up. And that, again, is part of the smart policing.
What you learn from studying the data from an enforcement standpoint, from a violence perspective. We discovered over time that most of the shootings in the city of Erie are not just random shootings or random acts of violence. A lot of them are not specifically directed at any other crime. They are this. They're retaliatory shootings for the previous shooting that happened. We have identified groups of individuals engaged in retaliatory shootings. If we know that's what our problem is, how can we do it better? Go out across the country and find out where it's done more effectively. And so what comes from that is a group violence reduction strategy. And this is a radical thing. This radical approach says, number one, instead of just saying that there are gangs out there, can you identify them? Can you name them by name and find out who specifically is associated with those networks? Find out who they are, don't just guess. And so how do you do that? You actually use data and research, and you connect them through a social network analysis so that we know, without even knowing their faces or their names, we know that there's this connectedness between these individuals. We know from our ability to identify these gangs who's connected to what gang.
But here's what has changed over the last few years as part of the UnifiedErie initiative, is that we realized that data helps us tremendously. Talking about data that relates to those individuals through their arrest records. So what we are able to do is to identify these individuals and identify them with the behavior. We're not talking about individuals who are committing low-level crimes. Remember, this is an anti-violence initiative, UnifiedErie, and the enforcement prong is about going after individuals with guns committing violent crimes. We don't want the low-level offender. We want the chronic violent offender. Why? Because they're the ones that are shooting your house up. They're the ones that are breaking into your homes. They're the ones that are shooting each other. Those are the ones we want to target. And that's what the data allows us to do. What are we going to do with those individuals? What we try to do is we identify them, and we're going to try and reach them.
And the radical thing that happens across the country in order to effectively reduce group-related violence is instead of waiting for the next shooting to occur and going out and solving it, because that will continue and law enforcement will continue to solve those crimes, you do this crazy thing where you actually pick the most significantly connected member of each one of the gangs and you call them in for a meeting. You invite them. It's as simple as that. It's called a call-in meeting, but it's an invitation. We actually offer the members of these gangs help and an opportunity, if they choose tonight, to get out of their gang-related activity and stop engaging in violence to turn their life around. And the message to them that evening is very clear. We want all of you. We want you safe, alive, and out of prison.
And you've heard something about the call-ins. We're going to try and reach those individuals and give them that opportunity to get out of the web, off that path of crime, because that path is going to lead to jail.
But you are told that evening, if you leave this meeting tonight and your gang or your network engages in the next shooting, you are going to get our full attention. In whatever means we can lawfully utilize, we are going to give you the attention that you called out for because you did not take the opportunity tonight. And so our hope in these call-in meetings as they develop is to be serious in both respects. If we tell them we're coming after them and going to enforce very significantly on their groups if they engage in the next shooting, we need to do so. But more importantly, the radical thing is if we offer them an opportunity to leave their gang, and they do, we provide them the help that they need. So what comes from that is a group violence reduction strategy. Great support from throughout the community, both financial support and support with regard not only to resources but the opportunities to help these young men creates the Erie County Reentry Services and Support Alliance, a part of that, and the hiring of case managers to actually, if those kids, when they go down in the basement that evening, to have dinner with the folks that just gave them the lecture or the hope upstairs, they decide to turn their lives around, we're going to be serious about providing them the opportunity. It's not easy. It's not a switch that you turn off and now you're out of the gang and life is good. It's hard work, but you can't do that work alone, so you need help from the community.
The district attorney, the U.S. attorney, the chief of police, probation officers, we are all part of an initiative of which 2/3 have nothing to do with arrest or prosecution or putting anyone in jail. They deal with prevention and they deal with reentry. Enforcement is a small part, but necessary part, of UnifiedErie. So when you look back on UnifiedErie and you think of prevention, enforcement, and reentry, enforcement, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. But prevention, stopping it, and reentry, helping those individuals who went by the wayside before but want to come back in, extremely important to us in law enforcement that work. As District Attorney of Erie County, I couldn't be more invested in UnifiedErie because each of those prongs cannot and should not work without the other. It's as simple as that.